My granddaughter looked me straight in the eye and said, "Grandma, this quilt is so embarrassing. Did you really think I'd want something this old-fashioned for my dorm room?" Then she tossed it aside like garbage while her friends snickered, and I stood there in my best dress holding back tears as she opened gift after gift of expensive electronics I could never afford. But what she didn't know was that quilt represented 14 years of my Social Security checks, and I was about to show her exactly what happens when you bite the hand that's been feeding your future. Before you hear the rest, let me tell you where I'm from and why this matters. I'm Dorothy Sims, 71 years old, retired after 38 years of teaching art to middle schoolers in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Most folks call me Dot. I've lived in the same small farmhouse on Maple Street since 1987, when my late husband Frank and I bought it, with hopes of filling it with grandchildren's laughter. Frank passed 8 years ago from cancer, leaving me with mortgage payments I could barely manage on my teacher's pension and memories that echo through empty rooms. Lily has been the center of my world since she was 4 years old. My daughter Rachel had her young and unmarried working double shifts at the plant just to keep food on the table. So Lily spent most of her childhood with me, finger painting at my kitchen table, while I graded papers, helping me tend the tomato garden out back, learning to thread needles for the quilting projects that kept my hands busy and my heart full during those long winter evenings. She used to call me Gamma Dot, couldn't quite manage the R in Grandma until she was 6. Those early years were magical. Lily would arrive at my house every morning before school, backpack dragging behind her, usually wearing mismatched socks and carrying whatever treasures she'd found in her room the night before. A broken crayon, a smooth rock, a wilted dandelion. I'd make her scrambled eggs with cheese the way she liked them, and braid her thick brown hair while she chattered about her dreams. She wanted to be an artist like me, she'd announce proudly, showing me crayon drawings of horses with purple manes and houses that floated in blue skies. After school, she'd dump her homework on my dining room table, and we'd work together, her on math problems, me on lesson plans for the next day. But the real magic happened in my sewing room, a converted bedroom where I kept my quilting frame bins of fabric scraps organized by color, and the antique Singer sewing machine that had belonged to my mother. Lily would sit cross-legged on the braided rug, sorting fabric pieces by size while I worked, telling me elaborate stories about the characters she imagined living in each colorful square. I started the college quilt for Lily when she turned 5. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I could see her future stretching out like a beautiful pattern, and I wanted to give her something that would remind her of home when she eventually left for the world beyond Cedar Falls. Every month, I set aside $50 from my teaching salary, sometimes more when I picked up summer school or tutoring jobs, into a savings account I'd opened in her name. $50 doesn't sound like much, but for a teacher in Iowa, it meant skipping new clothes, eating more macaroni and cheese dinners, keeping the thermostat lower in winter. The quilt itself became my love letter to our shared memories. I chose fabrics, carefully soft yellows from the curtains that hung in her childhood bedroom, deep greens that matched the oak tree we'd carved our initials into blues, like the summer sky we'd lie under during our backyard camping adventures. Each square told a story: the red flannel from her favorite pajamas, the tiny rose print from a dress I'd sewn for her 8th birthday, the cheerful sunflower fabric we'd picked out together at Hanson's quilting shop during one of our Saturday afternoon adventures. I hand-stitched every seam, working by lamplight after school, while Lily did homework at the kitchen table, humming quietly to myself as I connected piece to piece, memory to memory. The pattern was complex, a modified double wedding ring design, with interlocking circles that symbolized the unbreakable bonds of family. Some evenings, Lily would abandon her homework to sit beside me, threading needles with her small fingers, or organizing my pincushion while I told her stories about her great-grandmother who'd taught me to quilt in this very same room decades earlier. But as Lily grew older, our relationship began to change in ways I tried not to notice. She started spending weekends with friends instead of helping me weed the garden. The finger painting sessions became rare, then stopped altogether. She traded her art supplies for a smartphone, her storytelling for social media. By high school, our conversations grew shorter, more functional. She'd text instead of calling, asking for rides or permission slips, rather than just wanting to talk. I told myself this was normal. Teenagers need space to become themselves. Rachel reminded me constantly that I was being too clingy, that Lily needed room to grow. So I stepped back, watching from a distance, as my granddaughter transformed from the curious, creative child I'd known into someone I barely recognized, someone who spoke in abbreviations I didn't understand, who seemed embarrassed by my old-fashioned ways, who looked at me with barely concealed impatience when I asked about her day. Still, I kept adding to that savings account every month, even after Frank died, and money became tighter. I picked up substitute teaching jobs, sold vegetables from my garden at the farmer's market, even started taking in alterations work to supplement my pension. Every deposit felt like an investment in Lily's dreams, wherever they might lead her. By her 18th birthday, I'd saved $23,000, enough for a good start at any state university, maybe even some of the private colleges she'd mentioned in passing. The quilt took me 14 years to complete. I finished the final binding stitches 3 days before Lily's 19th birthday party, working by lamplight in my sewing room, while rain drummed against the windows. When I held it up to examine my work, the pattern seemed to glow in the golden light. All those careful stitches, all those preserved memories, woven together into something beautiful and lasting. I folded it carefully in tissue paper and placed it in the gift box I'd saved from Christmas, adding a handwritten card. For my dearest Lily, may this quilt wrap you in love wherever your journey takes you. Every stitch holds a memory of our time together. Love, always Gamma Dot. I spent the morning of the party getting ready with the kind of care I usually reserved for church or parent-teacher conferences. I chose my best dress, navy blue, with tiny white flowers, the one Frank always said brought out my eyes, and paired it with the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 20th anniversary. I wanted to look nice for Lily's celebration, wanted her to be proud to introduce me to her college friends who'd driven up from Iowa City for the weekend. The party was at Rachel's house, which had been transformed beyond recognition. My daughter had hired a caterer, rented round tables with white linens, even brought in a DJ who set up speakers in the backyard. Everything looked expensive and sophisticated, the kind of celebration I could never have afforded to throw myself. I arrived early, carrying my carefully wrapped gift and wearing my biggest smile, ready to watch Lily open presents, surrounded by people who loved her. But the moment I walked into Rachel's living room, I felt out of place. Lily's friends were scattered around the space, all looking effortlessly stylish, in ways I couldn't quite define. The girls wore clothes that looked casual, but probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, their hair perfectly tousled, their makeup flawless. The boys looked equally polished, even in jeans and t-shirts. They spoke in rapid bursts about people and places I didn't know, their conversation peppered with references to campus life, internships, spring break trips I couldn't imagine affording. Lily herself looked beautiful grown up, in a way that made my chest tight with pride and loss. She wore a flowing dress in soft coral, her hair swept up in an elegant twist, silver jewelry catching the afternoon light. When she saw me, she smiled and waved from across the room, but didn't come over to greet me. I stood by the gift table, my package looking humble among the array of professionally wrapped boxes, gift bags with designer logos, and cards that probably contained checks with multiple zeros. "Oh, you made it!" Rachel appeared beside me, her voice bright but strained. She looked tired despite her perfect makeup, and I wondered how much this party was costing her. "The gifts are going over there," she said, gesturing toward the dining room where an impressive display was growing. "Lily's saving the opening for later when everyone's here?" I spent the next hour making small talk with relatives I saw only at holidays, sampling catered food that was fancier than anything I usually ate, and watching Lily move through the crowd like a confident young woman I barely recognized. She laughed easily with her friends, posed for countless photos, and accepted congratulations with the kind of social grace I'd never managed to teach her. Part of me felt proud. Another part felt invisible. When it came time for presents, everyone gathered in the living room. Lily sat in the center like a queen, holding court, her friends arranged around her with phones ready to capture every moment. I found a spot on the couch beside Aunt Margaret, watching as Lily worked through gift after gift with practiced enthusiasm. There were expensive electronics, a laptop, noise-canceling headphones, a tablet for textbooks. There were designer clothes, jewelry, gift cards to stores I'd never shopped in. Each present was greeted with squeals of delight, hugs for the giver, and immediate sharing with the crowd. My quilt was the last gift. The one tucked almost apologetically behind all the flashy packages. Lily picked up my box with a smile that looked slightly forced, reading the card aloud in a voice that grew quieter as she went. "From Gamma Dot," she announced, and I felt a flush of pleasure at hearing the old nickname. But when she opened the box and lifted out the quilt, I watched her expression change. The room grew quiet as she held it up, and I realized with growing horror that my beautiful, carefully crafted quilt looked old-fashioned and homemade compared to everything else she'd received. "It's a quilt," she said unnecessarily, her voice flat. Some of her friends leaned forward to look, and I caught murmured comments. "How vintage, so retro, like something from a pioneer movie." Lily's smile became fixed, painful to watch. "Thank you, Grandma Dot. It's really something." One of her college friends, a blonde girl whose name I didn't catch, laughed lightly. "Are you going to hang it on your dorm wall? Very boho chic." That's when Lily said it. The words that shattered something inside me that I didn't know could break. "Grandma Dot, this quilt is so embarrassing. Did you really think I'd want something this old-fashioned for my dorm room?" She didn't even lower her voice. Everyone heard. Everyone saw my face crumple before I could stop it. The room fell silent except for the DJ's music drifting in from the backyard. I watched Lily fold the quilt with careless hands and set it aside to make room for the next round of congratulations, already moving on, as if my 14 years of work, my decades of love, had never happened. I stayed for another hour because leaving immediately would have made a scene. I helped Rachel clean up, accepting sympathetic looks from relatives who'd witnessed the moment but didn't know what to say. When I finally gathered my purse and kissed Lily goodbye, she hugged me quickly and said, "Thanks for coming, Grandma," like I was any other guest instead of the woman who'd raised her. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles went white. I didn't cry until I was safely inside my own house, sitting at my kitchen table, where Lily used to do homework, staring at the empty spaces where her artwork used to hang on my refrigerator. The tears came quietly at first, then in great heaving sobs that left me exhausted and hollow. But the real pain came 3 days later, when Lily called, with her voice soft and sweet, asking if we could have lunch together. Just the two of us. She missed our talks, she said. She'd been thinking about the quilt, and she felt bad about her reaction at the party. She was stressed about starting her sophomore year, worried about money, and she hoped I'd understand and forgive her thoughtlessness. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe that my granddaughter had realized her mistake and was reaching out to rebuild what felt irreparably broken. So I said yes to lunch at Murphy's Diner, our old Saturday afternoon spot, where we used to share chocolate milkshakes, and she'd tell me about her dreams for the future. She arrived looking contrite, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of the party clothes from the weekend. She hugged me longer than usual and ordered my favorite, a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup, even though she claimed to be watching her weight. For an hour we talked like we used to. She asked about my garden, admired the new photos I'd had printed from Frank's old albums, even mentioned the quilt again. "I've been thinking about it," she said, stirring her soup thoughtfully. "About the quilt, I mean. I know you put a lot of work into it, and I was horrible at the party. I guess I was just overwhelmed by everything, trying to impress my friends." She looked up at me with Frank's brown eyes, and my heart wanted to forgive everything. I really do appreciate it, Gamma Dot. And I've been thinking about other things too. That's when she brought up the college fund. Casually, like she was mentioning the weather. She'd heard from Rachel that I'd been saving money for her education. She was so grateful, she said, but also worried about asking. Money was tight for everyone these days. She'd been looking at transferring to the University of Northern Iowa's art program. Following in my footsteps, she said with a smile that felt like sunlight. The tuition was manageable, but she'd need help with living expenses, art supplies, maybe a reliable car to get back and forth. I listened to her talk about her plans, watching her face light up with enthusiasm I hadn't seen since she was small. This was my granddaughter, the little girl who used to help me sort fabric scraps and dream about becoming an artist. Maybe the party had been an aberration. Maybe she really was sorry. Maybe this was our chance to reconnect. I've saved some money, I told her carefully. It's been accumulating for a while now. Her face brightened. Really? How much? I hesitated, but her expression was so hopeful, so reminiscent of the child I'd raised. 23,000, give or take. Lily's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw something flicker across her face that I couldn't quite identify. Surprise, relief, something else. But then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Gamma Dot, you're amazing. I can't believe you saved all that for me. We spent another hour talking about her transfer plans, her art classes, her hope of maybe teaching someday, like I had. When she hugged me goodbye in the parking lot, I felt lighter than I had in months. Maybe we could rebuild what had been broken. Maybe the quilt incident was just a bump in our road. But 2 days later, everything changed again. I was cleaning out my desk drawers, finally tackling the accumulated paperwork Frank used to handle, when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lily, but the message wasn't meant for me. I could tell because it started with M and contained details about someone named Jake and a party I hadn't heard about. Clearly, a misdirected message to her friend Emma. I was about to text back to let her know about the mistake when another message came through. This one made my blood freeze. The quilt thing worked perfectly. Gamma's totally guilt-tripped and ready to hand over the college money. God, she's so predictable with the whole wounded grandmother act. I just had to sit through lunch pretending to care about her boring stories. My hands shook as I read the words again, hoping I'd misunderstood. But there was no misunderstanding the message that followed. Seriously, old people are so easy to manipulate. A few tears, some fake nostalgia about art class, and boom, 23 grand for basically nothing. Jake's going to die when he hears how much she saved up. We can probably stretch this out until graduation if I play it right. I set the phone down like it had burned me. The messages kept coming, each one another nail in the coffin of my faith, in the granddaughter I'd loved unconditionally. The best part is she actually thinks I want to be an art teacher like her. As if I'd waste my life in some small-town school when I could be doing real art in Chicago or New York. But let her believe whatever keeps the money flowing. I sat in my desk chair for a long time, staring at those messages until the words blurred together. Everything clicked into place with horrible clarity, the sudden interest in reconnecting, the carefully timed apology, the enthusiastic discussion of art school. Even her choice to meet at Murphy's Diner, the place where she'd always been able to charm me into buying her extra dessert or letting her stay up past bedtime. This wasn't my granddaughter reaching out in love and regret. This was a calculated performance designed to extract money from an old woman too lonely and desperate to see through the manipulation. The quilt, which I'd foolishly hoped might bring us together, had simply been another tool in her arsenal. Something to feel guilty about, to apologize for, to use as evidence of her newfound maturity and appreciation. I thought about the $23,000 sitting in that account, accumulating interest month after month, while I ate generic cereal and wore the same clothes year after year. I thought about the hours I'd spent stitching that quilt, believing I was creating something meaningful for someone who loved me. I thought about Frank, who'd been gone 8 years, but whose memory I'd tarnished by letting his granddaughter take advantage of the savings we'd both sacrificed to build. But mostly, I thought about how stupid I'd been. How easily I'd been played by someone who saw my love as weakness, my generosity as gullibility, my loneliness as opportunity. I walked upstairs to my sewing room and pulled out the quilt I'd brought home from the party. It was still folded carelessly from when Lily had dismissed it, wrinkled from being stuffed back in the box. I spread it out on my quilting frame and ran my hands over the familiar fabrics, remembering the stories each piece told. The red flannel from Christmas morning when she was 6. The green cotton from the dress I'd sewn for her school play. The yellow calico from the pillowcase she'd insisted on taking to summer camp. But the memories felt different now, tainted by the knowledge that the person I'd made this for didn't exist anymore. Maybe had never existed. Maybe I'd been loving a version of Lily that lived only in my imagination, built from my need to matter to someone, to be important in a world that seemed to have moved on without me. I didn't destroy the quilt. Instead, I folded it carefully and placed it in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, alongside other treasures, from a life that suddenly felt very far away. Then I went downstairs to my computer and logged into the online banking system Frank had insisted I learn before he died. The college fund account showed 23,847.62s. Money earned through decades of small sacrifices accumulated with the kind of patience that only comes from deep love and unshakable faith in the future. I stared at that number for a long time, thinking about all the things I'd given up to see it grow. All the meals I'd skipped, clothes I'd mended, instead of replaced vacations I'd never taken. Then I transferred every penny into my personal checking account. It took less than 5 minutes to undo 14 years of saving for someone else's dream. The confirmation screen glowed cheerfully, congratulating me on my successful transaction, as if the bank's computer could understand the magnitude of what had just happened. I wasn't stealing the money, had always been mine, saved from my own earnings, held in my own name. I was simply taking back what I'd given too freely to someone who didn't deserve it. I didn't feel vindictive or angry. I felt clear-headed for the first time in months. Lily wanted to treat me like a foolish old woman whose only value was financial fine. But this foolish old woman was keeping her money. I spent that evening planning. Not revenge. I wasn't interested in hurting Lily the way she'd hurt me. But I was interested in reclaiming my life, in remembering who I'd been before I'd defined myself entirely through my relationship with my granddaughter. I'd been Dorothy Sims' award-winning art teacher, Quilter Frank's beloved wife, a woman with her own dreams and talents and worth. The next morning, I drove to Cedar Falls Community College and enrolled in their continuing education program. Photography classes, watercolor workshops, even a computer skills course that would help me navigate the digital world I'd been avoiding. When the perky young woman at the registration desk asked what had inspired me to go back to school, I smiled and said, "I'm investing in myself for a change." That afternoon, I visited Hanson's quilting shop and bought supplies for a new project, not a memory quilt this time, but something abstract and bold colors I'd never worked with before, patterns that challenged everything I thought I knew about my own capabilities. Mrs. Hanson, who'd known me for 20 years, raised her eyebrows at my unconventional fabric choices, but didn't ask questions. I also signed up for their weekly quilting circle, something I'd always thought I was too busy to join. When the other women asked about Lily, they all remembered her from the days when she'd accompany me to the shop. I simply said she was doing well at college and changed the subject. I wasn't ready to talk about what had happened, maybe never would be. Some pain is too private to share even with well-meaning friends. 3 weeks passed before Lily called again. I was in my sewing room working on the new quilt, while afternoon light streamed through the windows when my phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But curiosity won. "Hi, Gamma Dot." Her voice was cheerful, casual, as if nothing had changed. "I've been so busy with classes, but I wanted to check in. How are you doing?" I set down my needle carefully before responding. "I'm doing very well, thank you." Something in my tone must have caught her attention, because she paused before continuing. "That's great. Hey, I've been thinking more about that transfer to uni. I know you mentioned having some savings put aside, and I wondered if we could talk about that soon. I need to get the paperwork started if I'm going to transfer for spring semester." There it was. The real reason for the call, delivered with the same calculated casualness she'd used at Murphy's Diner. I almost admired her consistency. "Oh, the college fund," I said pleasantly. "I'm afraid that's no longer available." Silence. "Then, what do you mean, no longer available?" "I mean, I spent it. On myself. Photography classes, art supplies, some home improvements I've been putting off. It's amazing how quickly money can disappear when you're not being careful with it." The silence stretched longer this time. When Lily spoke again, her voice had changed, become sharper, less carefully modulated. "You spent my college money." "My money," I corrected gently. "It was always my money saved from my teacher's pension and Social Security. I simply decided to use it differently." "But you said you promised." "I never promised anything. I mentioned having savings. I never said those savings would automatically become yours." I kept my voice calm, matter of fact. "Though I understand your confusion. After all, you've become accustomed to people giving you things without question." Another pause. Then, "This is about the quilt, isn't it? About what I said at the party. God Gamma, I apologized for that. I was stressed and stupid, and I'm sorry. But taking away my college money because I hurt your feelings is just—" "This isn't about the quilt," I interrupted. "This is about respect, about honesty, about the difference between love and manipulation." I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could almost picture her calculating her next move. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into the sweet, pleading tone I now recognized as performance. "Gamma dot, please. I know I messed up, but I need that money. I can't afford school without it. You know my mom can't help, and I don't have anywhere else to turn. Please don't punish me forever for one stupid comment." "I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm simply choosing not to reward behavior that would be unacceptable from a stranger, let alone my granddaughter." "What behavior? What are you talking about?" For a moment, I considered telling her about the misdirected text messages confronting her with evidence of her manipulation. But what would be the point? She'd either deny it or come up with another elaborate apology designed to get her hands on money that no longer existed. Instead, I said, "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." When she spoke again, the pretense was gone entirely. Her voice was cold, angry, more honest than it had been in years. "Fine, keep your money, but don't expect me to keep pretending we're close when you're obviously just a bitter old woman who can't handle the fact that I've outgrown needing you." The words should have hurt. A few weeks ago, they would have devastated me. But now, they just felt like confirmation of everything I'd already realized. "You're absolutely right," I said. "You have outgrown needing me, and I've outgrown needing to be needed." I hung up before she could respond. The house felt different after that conversation, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of empty or sad, it felt peaceful. Quiet, in a way that invited possibility rather than mourning. I went back to my sewing room and picked up my needle, working on the bold, abstract quilt that looked nothing like anything I'd ever made before. That evening, I called my neighbor Helen, a widow my own age, who'd moved to Cedar Falls the previous year. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the fence, but had never really talked. When I invited her for coffee, she sounded surprised, but pleased. "I'd love that," she said. "I've been meaning to ask about your beautiful garden. I can see it from my kitchen window, and it's just gorgeous." We spent the next morning drinking coffee on my back porch, talking about gardening and books and the changes we'd both navigated in recent years. Helen had also been a teacher high school English and had also sacrificed financial security to help family members who'd turned out to be less grateful than expected. We laughed about our shared foolishness, but without bitterness. Just two women acknowledging that love sometimes makes us stupid, but that stupidity doesn't have to be permanent. "What are you working on now?" Helen asked, nodding toward my sewing room window where the quilting frame was visible. "Something completely different," I told her. "Something just for me," she smiled. Those are often the best projects. Over the following months, my life expanded in ways I hadn't expected. The photography class led to a part-time job helping elderly community members digitize their family photos, work that paid surprisingly well and connected me with dozens of interesting people with fascinating stories. The quilting circle became a source of friendship and creative inspiration, women who appreciated my skills and valued my company for its own sake rather than what I could provide. My new quilt bold geometric patterns in jewel tones that would have scandalized my younger self caught the attention of a craft fair organizer who invited me to display my work. I'd never sold a quilt before, had never thought of my hobby as anything more than a way to keep my hands busy. But people responded to the piece with an enthusiasm that surprised me. I sold it the first day of the fair for more money than I'd ever imagined my work could be worth. The buyer was a young woman about Lily's age, a graduate student who'd driven from Iowa City specifically to see the crafts fair. She ran her hands over the quilt, with reverence asked detailed questions about my technique and inspiration. "This is incredible," she said. "The traditional craftsmanship with such contemporary design, it's exactly what I've been looking for to hang in my apartment. Something with history, but also completely modern." As I watched her load the quilt carefully into her car, I felt a satisfaction I'd never experienced when giving my work away. This woman valued what I'd created not because she felt obligated to, but because she genuinely recognized its worth. She'd paid fair price for fair work, a transaction based on mutual respect, rather than guilt or manipulation. I used the money to sign up for more classes, to buy better art supplies, to take a weekend trip to Chicago, where I visited museums and galleries, feeling like a tourist in my own life. For dinner, I ate at restaurants I'd always wanted to try, ordered wine with my meal tipped generously, because I could afford to be generous with strangers, in a way I could no longer afford to be with family. Lily didn't call again for months. When she finally did, it was a brief, awkward conversation about logistics. She needed some childhood belongings from my house for a psychology class project about family dynamics. The irony wasn't lost on me. I packed up her old art supplies, school awards, and photo albums, handling them with the kind of careful neutrality I might show artifacts from someone else's life. When she came to pick up the boxes, we were polite to each other like distant acquaintances. She'd cut her hair short and dyed it dark, wore clothes I didn't recognize in a style that seemed deliberately urban, aggressively different from the small-town girl I'd helped raise. We made small talk about her classes, my photography work, the unusually mild winter we'd been having. "I heard you're selling quilts now," she said as she loaded the last box into her car. "Mom mentioned seeing something about it on Facebook." "A few pieces," I confirmed. "It's been interesting learning to think of my work as having commercial value." She nodded, looking uncomfortable. "That's great. Really great." We stood in my driveway for a moment, both of us aware that this might be goodbye in any meaningful sense. I felt sad, but not the devastating sadness I'd expected. This was more like the melancholy of finishing a good book, sorry to see it end, but grateful for the story while it lasted. "Take care of yourself, Lily," I said, and meant it. "You too, Gamma Dot." She drove away without looking back, and I went inside to work on my latest project, a wedding quilt commissioned by one of Helen's neighbors, traditional pattern, but in unconventional colors that challenged everything I thought I knew about what a bride might want. The young woman had given me complete creative freedom, trusting my expertise in a way that still amazed me. Trust earned through demonstrated skill rather than demanded through blood relation. That night, I pulled out the cedar chest and looked at Lily's quilt one more time. 14 years of work, countless hours of love and hope stitched into every seam. It was still beautiful, still represented some of the finest craftsmanship I'd ever achieved. But it no longer felt like a rejection or a symbol of failure. It felt like a chapter in my story that had ended, freeing me to write new ones. I folded it carefully and put it away, not in anger or sadness, but simply because some treasures are meant to be kept for ourselves. Some love letters are never meant to be delivered. Some gifts are too precious to waste on people who can't recognize their value. The next morning, I started planning a new quilt, one that would challenge every assumption I'd ever made about what my work should look like, what my life should contain, what I owed to other people versus what I owed to myself. At 71, I was finally learning to be my own favorite granddaughter, to give myself the kind of unconditional love and support I'd always lavished on others. And for the first time in years, the future looked like something I was creating, rather than something that was happening to me, something bright and bold and entirely my own.